Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com, where I am Executive Community Leader of the Future of Payroll, and I do many other things, but enough about me. My guest today is Lori-Anne McPherson, a longtime Payroll and Tax Compliance Manager. Hello, Lori.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. And it's Lori. Do you like to go by Lori or Lori-Anne, or?
You can go by Lori. For legal purposes, I use the full first name.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that makes sense, given that we're talking about a little bit about tax compliance today too.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so before we kind of dive into our topic,
Mm-hmm.
let me just I'll give the audience just a sort of high level overview of what the topic is, and then I have a
Sure.
special question for you, and then we'll kind of dive into the actual topic. So.
Okay.
We've covered this topic, in the podcast before, of people just sort of ending up in payroll, and you have your own journey story to tell around that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we're going to kind of explore some of the conflicting sort of charters or or objectives of payroll. It's an ongoing investment in the organization's most important asset, its people. Yet it's
Mm-hmm.
also a back office operation many wish only to contain, and perhaps as maybe frustrating as of all, it's categorizable as a liability according to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. So that's it's kind of a lot of conflicting things there, and we're going to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
What we might do as a profession to kind of address that and elevate our this payroll station in the organization. But first, Lori, what is it that galvanizes you every day? I find that just about anyone who's in payroll, who gets to a certain level in payroll or is in some other area of HR, human capital management, they have some passion for the world of work. What's yours?
So for me, I like numbers. I'm the geek, okay? But and I accept it freely. I live with that. But the thing I really, for me, that galvanizes, it's just the fact that you're in the payroll space, payroll tax, you're taking care of the company's asset, which is the employee. And you're taking care of them from the moment they're hired until they either terminate or retire or whatever. And it's your job to take care of them like you would, I don't know, a prized possession or something. You're not going to overbaby it, but at the same time, you need to make sure that they understand their role as an employee, where they can find the tools to find their paycheck stubs, or, if they want to change their withholdings, you're helping them to open their world. This is their money. They need to figure out how to manage it. And a lot of times they already do. But if they're a new hire straight out of college or high school, you're giving them those tools. You're showing them, hey, the IRS is a real thing. That's why you heard your parents talk about them and stuff like that. So it's always been my focus to make sure employees have the tools, the education, they know where to go find resources. But also at the same hand, you're taking care of the company, because the company's well-being is really tied into each employee, right? Because they have a specific focus or a specific job or role that they're doing. And so if you're not taking care of the employee, you're in a sense not taking care of the company, because you're hurting their bottom line, because then you lead to dissatisfaction, you know, bad comments, bad morale, culture, all of that. So it may not seem important, but that contact with that payroll person, whether it's practitioner or manager or benefits or tax, you're really integral in, making sure the employee feels heard, feels like they understand, and that they've gotten the information they need.
You've hit on so many great points there.
Thanks.
We could even just do the podcast on this, and I actually think it's going to weave in a little bit. Maybe we'll have you back another time.
Okay.
But I've yeah, sure. I've always said that that payroll is, I think it's ground zero for the employee experience, right? It
Mm-hmm.
really is, because the vast majority of people, we talk about, having purpose in your work and all of this and doing what you like. And all these things are very important. People strive for these things, but the vast majority of people do not have the luxury of not working for pay, or not striving for as much pay as they can
Mm-hmm.
for working. And so, that's really is kind of just where the rubber meets the road. You talk about, payroll department, basically serving two main stakeholders, the individual employee and the employer, and you're kind of protecting both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually wrote about this in my latest article for the magazine at HR.com, and around how fintech is helping with the on the pay disbursement side of things to really help improve the employee experience from that standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we've covered a lot here on the podcast, and is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is, everyone seems to kind of sort of trip into payroll, or sort of end up in payroll by, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but sort of like by accident, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily anything that folks um, think about when they're freshmen in college, or when they're thinking about what colleges they're going to go to. Yeah, because I want to be in payroll. But a lot of folks end up in payroll, and learn after the fact, hey, there's a big and interesting world here in payroll. How did you find yourself in the payroll profession? Like, how did that come about?
So I was thinking about it after I got your question. And when I was in high school, I had an opportunity to intern, if you will, at my neighbor's house. She had her own accounting firm. She had taken her firm out of Seattle and moved it to our small town. Her husband had left his IT job to run her IT. So, and she had taken several clients. She ran multi-million dollar business, and this is the 80s, right? So it, it was fascinating. And so she needed someone to come and update her tax books and I think it's CCH. And so
Hmm.
those real thin pieces, so I would update those and stuff. And that's how I got introduced to tax. And that's how I got introduced to accounting. I was introduced to payroll. She had several major fishing companies. So, I would kind of hand calculate some stuff for her. And so it kind of went from there. I was in college, got a job at a dealership. I never had a Saturday free because I was the parts girl. You know, I was taking the money for everybody who got their parts at the dealership. And I I enjoyed the job, but I hated missing out on my Saturdays. I was in college. No one wants to give up their Saturdays. So I got
Not
a
at all.
job. I got a job at a seafood company, again, fishing Northwest. So, and at the time in college, I was taking Spanish and Japanese, and my boss was Mexican and spoke Spanish, couldn't read or write, but spoke it. And our customers were predominantly from Tokyo. So I was the office girl. My desk was by the front door. They could always use my phone to make those international calls. Again, pre-internet, or yeah, pre-internet. This is late 80s, early 90s, and they would use my phone to find out what the negotiating high and low was for each type of fish. And they spoke
Yeah.
Japanese, and I would write it down in Spanish. And then my boss would bark at me in Spanish, and I would tell them right in front of them in Spanish what it was. It was a fun time. But
Yeah.
part of that was that I was also assisting the payroll manager. We had a weekly payroll. During the summer, we had anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 people. We were processing payroll, again, pre-internet, pre-software. And I was working with one of our IT company vendors locally to develop not only fish tickets for our buyers, but also, to report to the state of Washington, but also we were working on software to figure out how to get away from hand calculating payroll. And so it was really interesting time and space, and just seeing the dawn of that, I knew that, payroll is integral because it's your assets of your company. Without them, you can't move. I hate to equate it to like a truck or piece of machinery, but without your people, your company doesn't move. And so I know it's counted as a liability, but it's both.
Well, what we're going to get to that because it's really interesting, and there are and maybe we can be a small piece of a little bit of a change here. The butterfly effect. That's truth be told, audience, this is what we're trying to do with this podcast: is maybe move the needle a little bit for this industry and profession. You talked about how you geeked out a little bit, you nerded out a little bit on the payroll when you were in high school and that sort of thing. And so, so one of the things is that still you were introduced to payroll very early,
Right.
and you took to it very readily in terms of proficiency and also in terms of interest, which is really intriguing. But also, had you not had that experience, you probably wouldn't have thought to necessarily go into payroll, although you had sort of an interest in accounting. What is it about payroll that attracts certain kinds of people? Like, are there certain kinds of people that gravitate to payroll? What kind of skill sets does payroll necessitate?
You have to be detail oriented, and not only for what's written like in an employment contract, but also what is the employee asking for? Because a lot of times employees are asking questions of payroll because they don't understand their payroll, and you have to decipher what they're saying versus what they're asking. And sometimes it's different. So you have to have great communication, which is also listening skills. You've got to be detail oriented. You've got to know that you are auditing and you're making sure that everything's buttoned up, it's done right. Are there mistakes? Yes. Can they be fixed? Yes. But the bigger the mistake, the more you have to look internally on your team and say, what is the control we're missing? What is the step we're missing? Why did this happen? So you've got to be a puzzle solver on it, and make sure, because the better controls you have, the more streamlined your payroll is, which frees you up for the other things. Like the IRS says, hey, your deposit was late. Why? And we're going to fine you. And you now all of a sudden you're not just focused on payroll. Now you're like, what happened with our deposit? Why was it late? Was there a glitch, or can we prove it? You've got to dig into that and prove it so that you don't pay a fine. Other things that happen is, an initiative comes in, a reorg comes in, and now they're looking at, what are we looking at for compensation? We need to provide data. The compensation team might need to look at bands and all of that. Are titles getting changed? Benefits changing? Are some employees moving off from being a W-2 to maybe they're going to be a consultant because they're going to focus on other things? So they're only going to be working maybe part-time, stuff like that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So whenever anyone mentions the IRS, there's always nervous laughter, but they do exist, yes. and you need to be compliant with them, especially, in all sorts of settings, but, in payroll as well. One of the most pronounced settings around that. You talk about detail-oriented, good at communication. I was thinking, conscientious,
Sure.
and also brave. You gotta be brave, because you're dealing with really important stuff. You said mistakes happen, and mistakes are made, and they can be fixed. But the bigger the mistake, the bigger the problem. And I always like to tell the sort of it's a joke, and I've heard it myself, say it so many times that I think people are bored of it. But I have to remember others may not have heard it before. But you wake up in the morning, you turn on the light in the bathroom, you don't call up the power company, say, hey man, thanks for getting my electricity to my house this morning, right? The same happens with payroll. Payroll goes through, it's right, Very few. It is the rare employee indeed that calls up payroll, says, "Hey, thanks for getting it right." But when it's wrong, that's
Mhm.
an immediate existential threat to the employer culture, and our retention is set to plummet potentially. Yes, I think it's more than half of employees are already looking for a new job after I think one or two mistakes, certainly two mistakes in
Mhm.
payroll.
Right.
So you got to imagine some are ready after one. Um, and so that's really interesting. So it takes and for the type of person to deal with that, to be the running point
Mhm.
at the nexus of that kind of stuff, of that enormity of responsibility. That's a purple squirrel. That's. So you have to be a certain. You have to be. You're not necessarily a common type of personality type or person
Mhm.
that goes into payroll, likes it, and is good at it. Um, this might be a good segue into the other topic that I'd like to
Mhm.
just explore with you a little bit in the time we have left, about five
Okay.
minutes, I think. Um, we hear a lot about payroll becoming strategic, and how payroll is, that people are an organization's greatest asset. Well, what is the investment, the financial investment that an organization makes in its people is payroll, their
Mhm.
compensation, right?
Right.
So it's a recurring investment in that sense in organizations' people, which we hear about them discussed as, the greatest asset of an organization. And yet the nuts and bolts of making payroll happen is very much a back office function. And from an operational standpoint, it's a cost to contain. Operational payroll, if it's unnoticed, that's actually really good. If it's unnoticed, because this is running well. But at the same time, it's very interesting because generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP,
Mhm.
they consider payroll. Payroll has been categorized for decades upon decades as a liability, which is not an asset. So it's really interesting, and I can see if you think about it, you can see the rationale behind that. But how do we reconcile these things? How do we kind of how do how do organizations value their people beyond being a liability because of the investment in the payroll in them, be so that the main financial investment in them? How do we deal with this sort of this spider web here to elevate payroll's station in the
Mhm.
organization, and also maybe shift the mindset when it comes to people?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it. Financially, payroll, or the bigger department, is considered a liability. However, if you're only, as an organization or leadership in an organization, if you're only looking at the money, you're missing two-thirds of your company. You're missing your relationships. And when I say relationships, I'm talking about internal with your employees and your teams, external with your vendors. And
Mm.
obviously, this isn't about vendors, so we'll just leave that one alone. But
Yeah,
relationships
sure.
is key. And so, if you're presenting like an all hands to everybody in your company and you're going over financials, I think it's really important for, whether it's the CEO or the CFO, or the chief payroll officer, which is now a new goal for payroll,
Mm.
to come forward and say, yes, financially, this is our liability, but here's our asset. Look at what we did this year. It shouldn't just be that
Yeah.
we grew 5% or that we met our $5 million marker or 5 billion or whatever. It should be that our teams came together, they collaborated, and they moved the needle up to this
Mm.
amount, or they exceeded our
Yeah.
expectations of moving 5 million and they hit 10 million. And I think
Mm.
that's where leadership really needs to notice payroll when it's good.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying. Everybody in payroll, hey, we weren't noticed this week. Woo, it was a good week, But at the same time, I think that leadership, not only on a strategic basis, but also just every day, needs to realize, hey, yes, they met their goals. They hit the target.
Mm.
They exceeded the target. Hey, uh,
Mm.
X team got their commissions in late. And payroll was able to hold payroll for an extra hour. They went through, they audited, they did everything, made sure everything was good, and still got it into payroll. And those are the fires that people outside of payroll really don't hear about until they're bad.
Yeah.
Then they hear about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, back to your analysis. It's a liability. It's a cost containment type group. But at the same time, you have to stop and not just look at the financial. These are our assets. These are our human resources. These are the people who make the company what it is, good, bad, ugly, whatever. But if they're doing great, it needs to be talked about. If they're making those progress or changes or strides towards the ultimate goal or the culture or whatever, that needs to be acknowledged. And a lot of times it's talked about in an esoteric way of, hey, we had 5% growth. No. Our IT team had this initiative. It cost $1 million for the project estimate. They came in at 900,000. They saved the company 100,000. Let's applaud that. Or hey, payroll and payroll tax and benefits were able to work together and streamline some processes, which saved 100 hours a month of, capacity that they were able to focus on something else.
It takes strong leadership at an organization to, when times get tough and, layoffs happen, to say, hey, wait a minute, let's not do this layoff. Let's try to save some money in another way instead, because these folks, even though, payroll is this thing that goes out every 2 weeks. It's a liability, right? This is not your father's liability, right? This is a different type of liability, right? In the past, I've said, it's to take another term from GAAP, right? The term going concern, right? Your organization, there is no company without the people.
Right.
Without the people, it's a figment of your imagination until it's executed by the people that you hire, right? And if you treat them one dimensionally, or you don't treat, if you consider them one dimensionally, in that way, then you could save money right until the point that operationally until you're no longer a going concern, and then it's too late, right?
Right.
Then it's too late. Very, very interesting stuff. Lori, we'll have to have you back on the on the podcast, I think. I have a feeling there's a couple more topics that we could discuss. It's been such a pleasure to have you, though. Thank you for joining.
Definitely, and thank you for the invitation. Love to meet again.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at hr.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.